will pull that up.
Hello, fermented folks.
Hello.
Welcome back to Fermented Fiction, the podcast where we debate and discuss the best genre fiction out there in the world today, and occasionally drink some beer and give some really chaotic ratings of said best genre fiction out there today. Today, as always, we are joined by our 4 co-hosts and a wonderful guest. I'm Claver Mullum. I am a horror author. And Colin, you want to introduce yourself, and we'll just go around the table to Cat.
My name's Colin. I work for Cascade Writers, and I am a writer myself, working on all kinds of things. And I'm easy to get a hold of. Just find me on socials.
And it's your job to find out what his handles are.
Yeah,
Jeremy.
do some digging, please. Hello, I'm Jeremy Hudson. I'm also here, and that's about my biography.
I love it.
Yeah, it's what I put on my business cards anyway.
I'm also here.
Yes, Jeremy Hudson, also here. Yay, very good. And wait, I wasn't paying attention fully. I was pulling up the chat. Are we doing updates right now or just introductions?
That
was all the update we're doing.
Okay, that's
good. Little update.
Well, there you go.
Travis.
I'm Travis Vermullen. I'm Clay's brother. We started this podcast during COVID in our prospective apartments, and it has grown. I also get married in 8 days. I'm pretty excited about that.
8
that's
whole
an update.
days.
8 whole days.
Hell of an update. How's anyone supposed to top that, dude?
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to bring up that a lady at church gave me a zucchini the size of my arm, but that's not... That's hardly as exciting.
That's pretty
It's
awesome.
pretty good. It's not married in 8 days good.
Yeah.
And finally, that brings us around to Cat Rambo, our guest.
I am Cat Rambo. I write fantasy and science fiction, and I am also here.
Yeah, you are.
There we go.
And we are glad that you are, Cat. We are very glad to see you on the podcast.
Thoroughly jazzed.
Huge fans. I've definitely read You Sexy Thing and loved it, and I'm so excited that the 3rd one just came out. That's the big news I heard.
Got it right
Yeah.
here.
Rumor has it.
Drive around town with it. I go to the coffee and they're like, "Hey, did you know my book is out?" And give me a latte. And yeah, it's very good to have it constantly.
Nice. Well, do you want to, before we get into this, Kat, do you want us to tell just a little bit more about yourself, so our listeners kind of know who they're listening to here?
Sure. I have written a whole bunch of fantasy and science fiction short stories. I won a Nebula for my novelette Carpe Glitter, which I guess is urban fantasy. As mentioned, I have written 3 now space opera books. I'm hoping to do 10 in the series eventually. I was president of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association for a couple of terms. And I have 3 cats named Bruce, Clark, and Baby Bear.
Nice. Now, Kat, before we get in, and you might not have the answer to this, I'm sorry to just spring this randomly on you, but before we get into the debate, you've just said something that I need an answer to, because words have meaning and they mean things. And I teach my students this all the time. Space opera. What is the opera part?
It's big and full of spectacle.
Okay.
Is what it is.
Because I've heard that term thrown around a lot. And I've always heard opera as like the singing opera, but big and spectacle. That's what defines an opera.
Wagner opera.
Okay.
Wagner-esque.
That helps a lot. That helps a lot. Because now when I'm looking for a specific type of sci-fi book, I know I do love space operas. I like the big, I like the spectacle. So thank you.
Space operas do kind of rule, yeah.
Yeah.
We can officially stop waiting for people to start bellowing in Italian in Cat Rambo's book. That is not coming. That doesn't mean there's any less spectacle or awesomeness within the pages, though. So you can definitely go check it out. And we're going to show you some reasons why, just by talking to Cat for about an hour here. It's going to be awesome. And we're going to start that process with forced enrollment.
Oh boy.
That's right. Hype it up. Now,
Oh, yeah.
forced enrollment, for those who may be new to the show, is our segment where we do our debate. So the chosen work for this week is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due, the author of 16 novels, the winner of many, many awards, including the American Book Award, including the Shirley Jackson and the Bram Stoker for this book right here. And in fact, she was the first Black author to win the Bram Stoker for Best Novel. So that's a huge accomplishment. This novel is, well, we'll see. We have a debate. So we're gonna see what this novel is. I won't blabber about it too much. But a quick summary of it. It is about a young boy who is punished for basically a schoolyard fight. And his punishment is to go to a reformatory school for boys, which is essentially a forced labor camp disguised as a school. And this is not a fictional aspect of American history. These schools were real. This one is based on a very real place. And we'll talk about that in the fermented facts. But for now, that's pretty much what you need to know. Young Robert, he gets in trouble for a very minor offense. He goes to this terrible school, and he starts to uncover the horrors within, while his sister on the outside, Gloria, struggles to try to get him free and to level the playing field of Jim Crow era legal systems, which is pretty impossible for a young African-American girl. So that is the book. And then there's a lot of supernatural elements as well.
Yep.
So our debaters today, representing Fermented Fiction, Colin Poynton, his first debate of the season. Colin will be championing the show. Cat Rambo, our guest, coming in, fitting as a writer of gladiator stories. Cat Rambo, which season are you representing today?
I'm sorry, which season?
Yeah, it makes me think of Beast of Tabat, where your gladiators have to represent a season, and then that season keeps happening.
Well, we're about to hit winter, so winter, since it's coming.
Excellent.
Winter has come.
Excellent. So Cat Rambo is here representing winter, and we are going to have a good, clean debate, aren't we, folks?
Yes.
Oh, God willing.
All right. So let's get started by rolling our D20s. Is everybody ready to roll? Locked and loaded?
Ready.
All right. You roll those dice. I have your 10-minute timer. I will start you. But first I need to know what you rolled. So as all you should know, listeners, at this time, but if in case you don't, force enrollment, we roll 2 D20s. The highest roll has to defend the thing. The lowest roll has to attack the thing, regardless of what they think about the book or movie. Colin, what'd you get?
I rolled 3 of a kind.
So that's a 3.
So 3 ones?
3 ones.
Okay.
Excellent.
Kat, did you get higher than 3?
I rolled a 5, which I was feeling
Whoa!
pretty bad about.
Hey, that'll do it.
This
Okay.
is like my rolling. I roll like Magic the Gathering. I'll roll for first turn. I'll get like a 5, and I'm like,
Oh God.
yep. Then it's a 6 is what beats me. Anyway, all right. So, Kat, you get to defend the Reformatory. Colin, you are on the attack. I have your 10-minute timer. Cat Rambo, you will start us off as the defender. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Put the dukes up. Touch gloves. Let's have a clean argument. 10 minutes begins now.
So I'm going to argue that this is an important piece of American fiction on a number of different levels. One is that, of course, stylistically, it is Tananarive Due, who's just a hell of a writer, and so it is beautifully written. And 2, it refers to a very important piece of American history that so many things like this have figuratively and literally been buried, right? Now, we just, like, so many things have happened. And Colson Whitehead did a book about the same place called Nickel Boys, which is also wonderful. And I will argue on an emotional level, it is just a tremendously wonderful read in both the desperation of Robert and Gloria, and the fact that Gloria keeps hitting people who seem to be helpful but aren't really. And I think it's just something all of us can identify with. Am I supposed to go for 10 minutes defending it, or is Colin now going to respond to my many excellent points?
Colin is going to respond.
All right. So the problem I had is with this book is how, some explanation is good, but there's a lot in this, and a lot, like 200 pages before we get any ghosts, a lot. And so it's trying to like fuse historical fiction with horror supernatural, which could definitely work out, but it's a long and toilsome road to get there in a lot of pages. And I was a little upset too with Gloria, I think is Robert's sister, who you really want. I mean, she's great in many ways, but it's like she really is just kind of hanging out in the background. It's like I really want to know about Robert and ghost hunting. Spoiler alert. We'll spoil a lot of things in this show, by the way.
Yep.
So he's kind of gets all the cool stuff, and then she gets to deal with the like being at home and getting attacked by white people and racism on a daily basis, while her brother has the interesting parts and also the scariest parts. So they're scary in different ways, but Gloria felt like she was just kind of helping out from a background the whole time. And it's like, I feel like these could have been combined in a more exciting way.
I think that's valid, but I think that one of the things that makes the two stories work so well is the way that they echo each other. And that Robert is in there in the reformatory dealing with kind of just absolutely overt brutality of racism, whereas she's out in the outside world dealing with the same sort of shit, but in kind of much subtler and sort of whitewashed terms. And also, I think, doesn't the supernatural element pretty much come the minute Robert hits the reformatory? Because he like talks about kind of feeling the ghosts. And that's the point where he says something about like, yeah, all kids know that there's ghosts when you're a kid, but you don't say anything about it or something like that. Which is a kind of really interesting moment. So I think the supernatural comes in there. And I also think that a horror novel is a very beautiful way to talk about this. And this is one of the things that speculative fiction can do, is that it literalizes the metaphor. And so here we have things that are haunting us kind of in history, but then they are literally ghosts as well. And we see that how harmful those literal ghosts can be.
There's definitely good, it's hard not to spoil it, who's a ghost and who's not, and what's going on. So there is some elements that are like, oh, there was more supernatural going on than I thought when I was first reading through it. And I felt that at times the Robert and Gloria, it's like they sort of were on this train ride. It's like plot wise, they're on the ride, but they're not really making the hard choices that push them forward themselves. It's like we're kind of on the rails. They kind of have plot armor they're going through, which isn't to say there's a lot of great stuff in the book. It's like you really want those main characters to be full of life and hopes and be very clear cut and excited about. It felt like some of the minor characters were like, oh, this old lady with the gun, like I want more of her because she's sick.
Who doesn't like an old lady with a gun, right? Well, it's interesting to me because I was reading today a nonfiction book. It's by Isabel Wilkerson called, I don't know if you say it cast or cased, but it is about race in America.
Cast.
And just it's a fucking brutal book to read. And I think that one of the things I appreciate about the Reformatory is it doesn't pull punches on the brutality there either. And yeah, it's it's not salaciously graphic or anything like that, but it's pretty brutal.
Oop, my light went off. Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart to learn the real things that go on. I got a lot of Shawshank Redemption vibes going on throughout the book. A lot of the same sort of stuff going on. It's like, oh god.
Well, I mean, I think,
and it's really hard to read when it's kids.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was talking to my brother, and he was just like, I cannot read stuff about kids in peril anymore. And it is a really hard read because not only is the kid in peril, but the peril is there and happening to him. And yeah. But yeah, this shit happened. I mean, we really, and so, is it a disservice to make it into a supernatural story? I don't think it is, because it makes more people think about it. Just as with The Watchmen, the television one, a lot of people didn't know about the Tulsa Wall Street massacre, right? And I didn't know about it, and I was like, holy shit, right? We should be learning this stuff in schools, and we're not. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it definitely does not relax on the facts on the ground of what you're going to encounter, especially when this is like everybody's against you, both at home and in the Reformatory, and continuously. It's like, is someone gonna do something nice maybe eventually? It's like, no, they're not. They are, but it's just for show.
It does a great job of, I think,
the
portraying
mayor.
that sort of prison mentality where where you would hope that the prisoners could kind of band together and make their lives a little easier through cooperation. Instead, they're pitted against each other and kind of scavenging and yeah, it's a really kind of, it's so weird because, like, William Golding's Lord of the Flies, that book, which is actually not, when people have gotten crashed on, like kids have gotten crashed on desert islands, this isn't what happens. They don't all go like, kill the pig. But here, it's not that these kids are bad. It's just that the system pits them against each other in a really awful way.
It does. And you just get frustrated with, who backstabs what for what horrible reason and their own personal gains. And it's like, oh God, if you could do something about it, if only there was some sort of way out. But the most exciting part for me was getting Haints in the Haint jar.
Yeah.
You just wanted to read that story, just like that part.
Yeah, that whole part is
a little more uplifting and fun.
And I think the very first ghost that he meets, which I don't, want to give any spoilers, but that ghost is a really interesting ghost. So, yeah, I don't want to.
You can spoil.
Can I? Okay, so the little boy ghost. I remember his name is. I want to say his name is like Boba, but I know
Redbone.
That's it.
And Blue.
That's it. Blue.
Oh yeah, Redbone and Blue.
Redbone and Blue. Yeah, Blue is because Blue's a ghost. So.
Why did it have to be? Why? Why did he have to go and become a Haint?
Beer of the week.
Beer of the week.
The debate has
Beer of the week
concluded. It is the beer of the week time.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for our debaters. So, beer of the week, we interrupt our little debate to cause an abrupt end to it at the 10 minutes, and we all select a beverage of choice. We do call it beer of the week, but this season I'm going with fermented drink of the week. Do you have a drink, Kat? You don't have to.
I was not prepared, but I will say, actually, I can't tell my D&D group that I was not prepared because they all drink dragon's milk. They would just be appalled that I did not have a dragon's milk close to my hand.
Dragon's milk is a good stout, but all right, we're gonna start at the top corner with Clay, just to give me some time because I have to get my camera a little silence here and go get mine. But Clay, what are you drinking? And I'm gonna go mute for a second. Go get mine.
Yeah, and though you don't have it, Kat, we will consider that your represented beer.
Okay.
So your D&D group can rest well, rest easy. Dragon's Milk is delicious. Shout out to Dragon's Milk. If you're ever in the Northwest, and I don't know if it's around other places now, but it's easy to find out in the Northwest, and it is awesome. Can you find it where you're at still pretty easy, Kat?
No. Well, I mean, you can still find it. It's just like we keep, like, somebody will on our, we got one of those group text chains, and suddenly it'll be like, found Dragon's Milk at Martin's,
Go hunt it down. Yeah. Dragons can't just get away with not getting hunted, even their milk. This is the way it goes. Well, for my beer of the week, I am bringing something from Métier Brewing, which, if you don't know, this is the first Black-owned brewery in Seattle and still one of the only Black-owned breweries.
Nice.
So I figured it would be good to pair with this book in the name of inclusion and dismantling societal oppression and getting some more Black representation in all industries. So yeah, Métier is delicious also, so that helps. The beer is great. This is their pale ale. They don't really name their beers anything fancy. They just name them what they are. But if you're ever in the area, Métier is delicious. It's in the Seattle area, North Seattle. I think it's in like Ballard. I haven't been there for quite a while, but it's somewhere like that, Ballard, or it might be on the east side. But yeah, highly recommend. Check it out.
Yeah, their brewery is on the east side now.
It is. Okay, yeah.
Love it. Colin, what are you drinking?
Oh, well, I have a backup beer. Fortunately, I know Clay, and I definitely have that same beer he has, the Métier Pale Ale. But I have a backup, thank God, because we're only professional, on this show. And so I have...
Yep, I'd say that.
Epic Brewing Imperial Pumpkin Porter. Porter brewed with pumpkin and spices. Epic Brewing Company, Salt Lake City, Utah.
Yeah.
Dang.
Can you say Epic Brewing Imperial Pumpkin Porter 5 times fast?
5 times fast.
Please say it 5 times as quickly as possible.
I like it. Jeremy.
There.
What are you bringing?
Me.
Yeah.
Well, what I have, in honor of, I guess, mostly having moved back to Montana at this point.
Hey, you're back in Montana?
Nearly. Maybe even Bozeman, but we'll see.
Hey, that's where
maybe.
How is that not your update and a cucumber was? Or a zucchini?
First of all, it was a zucchini.
Travis, you're Travis's neighbor now, but that's not as important as the zucchini.
I'm nearly Travis's neighbor now. That's hardly the same thing.
Okay.
And also nearly not. What if I end up in Whitefish? Then I'm just as far away from you as anybody else.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
All right. What are you drinking, maybe Bozemanite?
Well, I have this Highlander beer, the Strawberry Wheat Ale, from Missoula, Montana, and also Salmon, Idaho somehow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right
on. Delicious,
like
delightful. It is not thematic because I can't in Montana.
That's fair.
I have a bit of a thematic one, I think. Honestly, though, I didn't plan this. This is just a bourbon. So I'm doing fermented drinks.
You don't have to say those things. You know that, Travis. Like, you can just not say that you weren't prepared.
No one needed to know that I wasn't prepared.
No, I was prepared. But this is the bourbon I've been obsessed with for like months. What I'm saying
you talked about this last one.
I didn't plan this for this book specifically, but it works for this book. So Uncle Nearest, amazing bourbon, has one of the coolest bourbon stories I've ever heard.
That's right. It does work.
Jack Daniels is like distiller that taught him how to distill, but he was a servant of the house back when it was made, so he didn't really get the credit he deserved. Now his great granddaughter has a distillery and is the only like female master distiller to win several of the awards she's won. and it is just fantastic. I thought it was going to be a gimmick. I thought, hey, they're probably just going to capitalize off this story, but the taste is not going to be very good. I was very wrong. It is a fantastic bourbon. I very highly recommend. And that's what I'm drinking.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Cheers, everybody, to the Reformatory
It's a
by
Reformatory. There you
Tananarive
go.
Due to
I'll
Cat
take
Rambo. Thank you for coming on the show. And let's give Colin a round of applause. Let's go ahead and give
Yeah.
Colin a round of applause because we threw him to the
go,
wolves
bud.
a little bit on this one.
You did
This
it.
is a hard
You know?
debate
Wowzers.
on the negative
Holy
side.
moly.
And boy, that's what we do next. So we have a couple of little intermediate segments, and then we get to our open table, all you listeners. The first of our intermediate segments is called Fermented Facts. And since Colin had to debate this week, I went ahead and compiled a few so he wouldn't have that burden as well.
Oh, that's nice of you.
Nice.
And if you have any, Colin, that I don't get, you can definitely still share them. But here are the ones that I found. First of all, let's give Tananarive another round of applause just for being badass. 16 novels. This is her 16th novel. And she has won so many awards. But this one, like I said at the top of the show, was the first to win a Bram Stoker from a Black author for Best Novel, Superior Achievement in a Novel. It also was Best Novel for the Shirley Jackson. So that's kind of like winning the Emmys and the Grammys of horror, essentially. She also won the Chautauqua Prize, which is a national prize that celebrates a book of fiction or literary narrative nonfiction that provides a richly rewarding reading experience and honors the author for significant contributions to the literary arts. So not only is this book being very well received and highly respected in the horror genre, but it's also being respected as just a piece of American literature. And it totally deserves to do that because it is much a historical fiction piece as it is a horror novel. And on that note, it's devoted to and inspired by her forgotten uncle, Robert Stevens, who died at the Dozier School for Boys, which only shut down in 2011, you guys. Can you believe that? This place
I keep
shut
looking
down
at
in
that date
2011.
and like, is that right?
Oh.
Am I reading this right?
Yeah. 2011. I listened to an interview with her about it, and the way she described it was kind of too big to fail, and it had just been there for so long that shutting down an institution that's that ingrained in the community and that supported by the structures that prop up said community and kind of insulate it from whatever it is they feel they need to be insulated from, definitely is hard to shut down, hard to file lawsuits against them, hard to win those battles in court when it's so embroiled in the local area. And just horrifying to think about that this was still around just a little over a decade ago. When they did finally excavate the grounds for like the bodies, the unmarked graves that had been reported for decades, they found 55 bodies of young boys had been buried in the woods behind the school. This book took 13 years for Tananarive to write because she was doing such extensive research, very difficult research connected to her personal family history. And she also visited the school multiple times and obviously did a lot of work. And then she had to undergo the not easy task of also making this entertaining. She talked about that quite a bit in her interviews about like, this is still a horror novel. It's still a genre novel. It is meant to entertain people as well. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more, how to balance that and how to accomplish that. Cause I think she did, but man, with such heavy content, hard to do. So props to her for that. She calls this book Jim Crow horror. That is her own subcategory of horror that she's dubbed it. And it sort of stems from leaning into the terrorism, essentially, that was happening in Jim Crow America. Just this violence that was used to enforce slavery being still used to enforce things no matter how far they removed we were supposed to be from slavery in the Jim Crow era. We certainly weren't that far removed from it, not nearly as far as we presumed on a lot of levels, I think, and a lot of the ways we're taught history in this country that was just not true. And it took violence to enforce Jim Crow, just as it took it to enforce slavery. So I think that is important to acknowledge. And it's also cool that Tana, yeah, I have trouble pronouncing her name sometimes. But yeah, Tananarive Due comes from a family of activists. Her father is a civil rights lawyer. Her mother is a very prominent activist. They were very involved in all the civil rights movement. During her childhood, she spoke of meetings happening in her living room and people coming to them for support and help, and just being a place to trust for people under this oppressive umbrella. So that stuff all bleeds into the book. So if you read the book, you will see that it's coming from such an informed place, and it's really, really excellent glimpse into all of this. So those are my fermented facts.
One last thing, which is just that she dedicated the book to Robert Stevens, who's the main character, and also her uncle or great uncle. So there's not really much known about him because he died, the real Robert Stevens, because he died there at the Dozier School for Boys when he was like 15 or even younger. And so we don't really know anything about him. And so she dedicated this book to him and sort of created a whole story around what sort of historical fiction story about what he would have encountered, plus make it entertaining in a horror book.
All right. So those are your fermented facts. We hope you enjoyed them. I definitely recommend going out and listening to some of those interviews. She's an excellent speaker. She's a lot of fun to listen to. She has some amazing insights on fusing history with literature, on working through these civil rights issues in a way that is digestible. And just on writing in general, on being a lifelong devotee to the craft, because she certainly is. She wrote her first story when she was like 4, and I think a lot of us writers can relate to that, but not all of us take it to the level of excellence that she's managed to achieve. So I certainly recommend checking out her stuff. Let's get into our open table discussion.
Or would you
yes.
like to hear some notes?
Sure, we can do some notes.
There we go. So I do have some notes, as I will often do. Some of them, I'm actually going to begin with the end because it's not really related to the debate or the story. It's just, I'm glad we decided that these weren't fun facts. It has nothing to do with zucchini. I'm glad we went with fermented facts and not fun facts, because...
Not fun.
Not fun exactly, no. I mean, history is fun, but not all history is fun. Woo. All right. Anyway, moving on from final note. Note number 1 is, and this is just my first impressions of the story, and everything is, it's holes with ghosts, but more real in like a very sad kind of way. I think we can all agree with that. That hard-hitting literary analysis right there.
Top-notch stuff.
Yeah, this is hard-hitting near journalism. So yeah, the next note I have, we're into the debate now. Is important automatically good? Just because something's important, is it good? Is this book good? I mean, yes, I'd say it's a pretty good book. It's a good book, but the importance, I don't know what my point is. I maybe don't have one. In fact, I certainly don't.
I think that's something to acknowledge. Like, just because something has an important message or it stands on an important maybe podium or something doesn't necessarily mean it's a good book. This book is. This book is not what we're talking about there. But I could definitely see how that that would be relevant with a different book.
Yeah, with a vastly different book or movie or anything else.
I can
Almost
think of-
certainly.
I can think of several movies that are about important topics, but we're not very.
Incredibly important. Terrible. Yes. I'll pin that so that it's there when we need it most, and it can return. Yes. So my next note is just general good advice. Never validate Colin. It'll go right to his head. You don't want
It
to do
already
that.
has. Look at him smirking over there.
Look at it. Just oh my goodness.
That was my
Goodness.
mistake. My mistake as the host. I'm sorry, everybody.
I know.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. Number 4, ghosts are mostly vibes. I'm glad that's showing up in the book, because it's all about a vibe. If there's no vibe and a ghost shows up, that's how you know you're in a comedy, which this is not.
No, it's not. And Blue has hella vibes.
Yeah,
hella
sure.
vibes.
Hella
Yes,
vibe.
it's great.
I'm glad you agree with that, Cat. Thank you.
Well, it only sounds so official if I agree with you, but if somebody important actually does agree with you, that's you're onto something right there. And note number 5. Ooh, yeah, I ended up with quite a few notes. There was a juicy debate. Oh boy. But it just says I've given up on books that don't get interesting quick enough. So I'm glad this one sort of, keeps you wanting to read more. But there are books that are credited as being wonderful, wonderful books that I will never read because they didn't get interesting enough. And I'm looking at you, Lord of the Rings.
Wow.
Yeah.
Travis, hold up. Travis.
It's gonna get a hate
Yeah.
mail.
Travis.
Yeah, Travis. What
Well,
do you
probably
guys say,
Cat
Travis?
too. I mean, Cat is Cat's a big,
Maybe
big
Cat.
fantasy
Look.
person. I don't know.
Hey.
I think the Lord of the Rings. There's a sad phenomenon where if you give somebody the Lord of the Rings nowadays and they go, "Oh, I've seen all this shit before," and you say, "Oh, he did it, before anything else." They're like, "But no, I've seen Hobbits," and you're just like, "God damn it!"
Yeah.
No, and the sentence structure. I mean, it is a slightly antiquated, kind of complicated sentence structure. And there's weird Tom Bombadil popping up in the middle of things.
There we go.
We're
Talk
gonna
shit about
have-
Tom Bombadil.
Hey. We're gonna have a whole
Please.
debate about this where I'm gonna.
We are actually.
So
Yeah,
I don't want to hear it.
We're
Don't
gonna
even
have
talk about it.
words about
There's
this,
a whole
Travis.
Reddit forum devoted to celebrating Tom Bombadil. Yeah.
Everyone,
Downvoted to hell.
everyone trashing on Lord of the Rings is wrong, and we're gonna have a debate. on it. So,
Travis,
there we go.
hey, Travis, I hear you. And
Guy's
all I
religion.
have, I'm going to meet you halfway and
Finish
say that
your
it could
notes,
only
Jeremy.
be less readable if it was at the bottom of a well. That's what I'm
Finish your
gonna say.
notes, Jeremy.
Okay, I'll finish my note. My goodness, they're getting so salty over here.
Yes. Don't attack
Um,
my baby.
Fine. On to a less divisive topic. Old ladies with guns certainly rule. Basically
Absolutely.
every time they show up.
Mm-hmm.
Does it? Except in real life. That's
Well-
kind of scary. Depending on who has the gun. If my mom has the gun, that's probably, well, that's scary in a different way.
Yeah.
But it's also hilarious. So
True. It's only scary if she can figure out how to use it. And
actually,
then you
it's
definitely
probably scarier if she can't.
That's fair.
And I was thinking of Blue Beetle. If you've seen the Blue Beetle movie, the grandmother in that turns out to
Okay, I
have
still
been
wanna see
a guerrilla fighter in her youth and grabs a machine gun and it just kicks ass.
Love it.
Yeah.
that. Beautiful. So, yes, more of those in fiction, please.
There we go.
Every time. Moving on. There have been books filled with the things I didn't learn in school, some of which are, in fact, taught in school, but that's mostly an ADHD thing. Oh, well. That's okay. I wasn't going to use most of calculus or my history classes in my day-to-day life, quite frankly. But I would have preferred more useful stuff in school in general. If anybody hasn't listened to Boy in a Band's Don't Stay in School, do that because it's great.
It's a banger.
It's banger. And he's got beautiful hair too.
He does.
And yes, note, penultimate note here is probably would have been better off to just Lord of the Flies these kids.
They would have probably had a better time of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say so. It's not often I get to just have that stance about something, but this, yes. Better to Child Island that whole business. And then my 9th and final of 10 notes is knowing the history. This place would be haunted as balls, and probably is. It's certainly, yeah.
Did you say your 9th and final of 10 notes?
Yes, I started with number 10.
Oh, okay.
I don't often go in order. The show's weird. It's, yeah.
All right. I was like, math is different here.
Math is different.
Is different.
It's all vibes. It's all loosey goosey. Sometimes Travis will just pick random numbers, and my notes make no sense.
There we go.
They didn't make the most sense now.
True.
But here we are.
Yeah.
Here we
Here we are indeed. And you know, now we have reached the point where we can finally talk about how we really feel, everybody. So if you are alarmed by Colin's stance or Cat's stance about the Reformatory, rest assured you're going to learn what they actually think right now. And we're going to start with Colin because he had to be on the defensive first last time. So now he gets to start. Colin, what did you actually think of the Reformatory?
I thought it was like Due basically picked the hardest thing that she could possibly do. It's a good thing she wrote like 15 novels before this, because it's like, I'm going to write a book where it's going to be encapsulate my own family history and also talk about extremely important topic that's very divisive in the South today and has been 100 years ago plus, and also be like entertaining all the while and be historical fiction, but also horror, everything at the same time. So honestly, like, this book reminded me so much of Octavia Butler, where it's just kind of almost unfair to say, oh yeah, it's horror. It's like Octavia Butler wrote sci-fi, but she wrote her own stuff. And it's like, I don't think really helpful to say that she wrote sci-fi. She wrote her own stuff, which is her own genre, and it's super interesting. And I think Due, I haven't read other books of hers, but that's what this feels like. It's like, it's her kind of story. And obviously, you know, she pulled it off, and it's incredibly well done. But some people might be upset if they pick it up and they're like, oh, it's historical fiction, or oh, it's horror. Like, you know, it's going to be different than you might be used to, but it's its own thing. So I wouldn't really try and pigeonhole it.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. There's something to be said with reasonable genre expectations from your readership, right? We all kind of pick up a book and we read the blurb, and that's what sells us on it. And if you're looking for a ghost story book and you're like, I heard this is about ghosts, it is. But
It is.
and you're right, Kat, the ghosts are present in a subtle way from the beginning. But Colin's also right, I think, about like that you don't know for sure it's ghosts. And there's a lot of books that do the old 1-2 on you, and like you think it's going to be supernatural, and then it's just people, and turns out they're worse than ghosts could ever be. And yeah, like you never know if it's going to be that kind of reveal, and it always does disappoint me when I expect ghosts and I get that. I'm not usually a fan. And it does take a little while to get to like the ghosts are real for sure. I do think it's earned and everything, but I agree with you, Colin. I think that it is hard to put this book in one category or another. It's very, very expansive, and I think it crosses genres seamlessly. It's literary, it's historical, it's biographical, and it's certainly horror. It's all those things and more. So yeah, I agree.
And a genre like literary fiction, it seems like is way more open to that. Like when you pick up a book, it's like, this is an incredible literary fiction book of the year. It's like, you don't know what you're going to get.
That's the thing,
Because
right?
that's kind of the point, is like, it's literary, it's
Yeah.
about the writing, and it could be sci-fi, fantasy, horror, anything historical. It's about the lyrical nature of the sentence structure, Toni Morrison style. So yeah, it reminded me almost more of a literary book, where it's like, you're along for the ride, and it's going to be a lot of stuff.
I am
Yeah.
glad you said that.
And well done.
Yes, very well done. I'm glad you said that, because what this podcast has done for my brain when reading now is like, I'm constantly thinking like, okay, if I'm on the defense, what am I going to say? If I'm on the attack, what am I going to say? And this book is very, very good. But my one thing that I would have used in a debate is that it reminded me more of the writing of like one of my favorite authors is Kazuo Ishiguro. Has anyone read him? Remains of the Day, Clara and the Sun, and Never Let Me Go.
Yeah.
He blends like relational fiction of like people who are in love or familial relation with AI and science fiction, like very seamlessly. And Tananarive really did that super well with the supernatural elements and the Jim Crow era. But my one thing, it didn't scare me like at all. And it's a fantastic book. I don't want anyone listening to this to think like, don't go read the Reformatory. Do. But when I hear horror, this is also just me, I think. I can maybe list 2 books that have genuinely terrified me. And this didn't even come close. I loved the descriptions of the ghosts. I loved how she like walked us into those scenes. I thought they provided a lot to the narrative. I wouldn't have the book change in any way, but at no point in this novel was I scared at all.
So now I want to know the 2 that were scary.
Pet
Yes,
Cemetery.
please share.
Pet Cemetery, which
Okay.
is either merit of the book or the fact that I read it when I was home alone and I was 15 years old. That very well could have done it. And then actually a history novel, which is weird, but a nonfiction novel terrified me, was Rape of Nanking.
Oh, God,
Yeah.
I can
Back
see where
here behind me, but just like I got chills from the fact of like, oh, humans can do this to other humans. Oof.
Is that the book by Iris Chang?
Wait, yeah, let me find it. One sec.
I went to grad school with her.
Wow.
You know, she committed suicide. And one of the reasons they think she committed suicide was because that material was just so hard to write.
Oh, man. I can imagine. I mean, I didn't know that. No. And just the Reformatory, I think, borders on that. Like this is the thing. The scariest parts of the book, the parts that I was most terrified, were all the scenes with Haddock, like the scenes that weren't even involving ghosts. It was just like the abuse that other humans do to humans. That terrified me. The like whipping scene, I was on the edge of my seat. I had some chills. But whenever it involved like the supernatural element, I thought it was fantastic and it was really well written. But I never got this sense of dread that I got from the human parts of the story.
Yeah, I don't think that's really was the purpose of the supernatural in this story. Actually,
No.
It was like the echoes of the past. It was the justified rage and justified grief of these oppressed people. What did you think about that, Kat? The supernatural angle being infused in this story, and what did you think of the story in general? It is technically your turn, and then we'll be open table.
I really like this story. I got to interview Tananarive about it, and she also mentioned that Colson Whitehead did a book called Nickel Boys that came out around the same time. So I ended up reading them both because I was curious about the comparison, and they both stand up in very different ways. And I think one of the things I like about her book is that she does hit kind of a lot of the standard horror tropes,
Mhm.
like really kind of standard ones, but she makes them really interesting and I don't know, they just fit the story beautifully in a way that a horror novel, ghosts in a horror novel don't always seem natural, and somehow these ghosts seem natural.
That Southern Gothic.
That's it. That's it.
Mhm. Mhm. There's something
Looks
to
like
using
this.
that.
You need a visual.
You go, yeah.
It's a beautiful cover, and there's
It-
something to use
Yeah.
to using that term haints, right, instead of ghosts. I mean, that just
Yeah.
infuses it with like the local folklore. It's the local word for it. It makes such a difference. At least to me, it does. I always love like words have a lot of power, like Travis was saying earlier in the show, and that word haint has a lot of power in this story. I think.
Mhm.
It hates us.
Hey,
They hate us
Oh,
because they
you.
hate us.
I
Oh boy.
I love as well, and I hate to continue to do this on every podcast. I'm a theology teacher by trade. I loved the blend of the abuse that religion can open up, but also the hope that it can provide. Like
Mhm.
the Stevens family, whenever they start talking about God and they pray and they sing, it's like this beautiful, like, yeah, the world is really beating us down. It's dark, but there's something there. There's a light.
Yeah.
But then it'll
Mhm.
switch. It'll switch right from a chapter like that over to Haddock. And Haddock is like, I'm doing what God wants me to do. And it's like,
Mhm.
yep, those are the
Yeah.
drastic extremes that religion can provide. And
But
I
it
really
does
love
not
that.
hit you over the head. She does not talk down.
No.
This book does not talk down to the reader. Like
Mhm. Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
I think you're right. Like there's a lot about religion in here it's not like this person's good or this person's bad or this person has it right or wrong. It's like the way people treat one another and what they sing and quote and to one
Yeah.
another to support what they have to say.
And I have those conversations almost like weekly of like, why are you teaching this, like, about this one bishop who was so terrible? Why don't you teach only about the good bishops? And it's like, well, because yeah, I love my religion, but there's a lot of bad in it. Like it's not doing anyone any favors to ignore that. Like we should also look in that darkness.
Well, that's
Yeah,
the Lord's work, right? I mean, honestly, it is. The reason that like this book is so important, and not the only reason, but one big reason that it's so important is because we don't learn this shit in school.
Yeah.
Like we don't get taught
100%.
about these reformatories. Like it is not in the textbooks, straight up. You have to go search out a textbook that puts this in there. And those textbooks will be, they will be frowned upon by a lot of people too. And that's like, there's a lot to bearing that history. So I'm glad you do that, Travis. I think that's important work. And honestly, this book is doing the same thing. And it has the benefit of being genre fiction and being acclaimed as well, which it adds that entertainment value, which I think is one of the greatest things about genre fiction in general, like good genre fiction that brings up these important topics and tells a meaningful, powerful story because it gets that story out there into the world in such a bigger way, to such a larger audience. You don't have to be seeking out a civil rights read to enjoy this book, but you will learn from it and it will teach you an important lesson. So yeah, I think that's important to teach about the bad and the good, because otherwise the good has no context, and it becomes a fairy tale.
Yeah.
Yeah, I learned just go to Chicago. Get out of the South. Go to Chicago.
That's what you want to do.
That was the point of the book. Thank you, Colin.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Thank you for summarizing. That was very good.
I thought that was a really interesting plot line, the thought that the authorities were using Robert to try and lure the father back so they could dispose of him. Because I thought that added a really interesting tension, because you were like, is the dad going to come try to get him? And what happened? Because it's clear that if he does, they're going to be waiting for him. And yeah, it's
As somebody who's written over 300 short stories and published 6 novels, Kat, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. But how many how many arcs and points of tension and character through lines are going on in this story at the same time? just
man.
so subtly. And like Travis, you brought up the religion thing. That was a great point. I noticed it, but I'm not a theology person, so I didn't like focus on it. And I would have never labeled this book as like a theological debate kind of book, but you could teach a whole class on the theology in here.
Yeah,
I mean, it was
stands out.
awesome. And there's just like 10 or 12 like through lines in this story that are all happening at the same time, and you barely notice they're all in the room. It's like it's just awesome. But what did you think about that, Kat? And what was your favorite like through lines through the book?
Well, I did like the sisters line very much, even though
Mhm.
there is like nothing supernatural happening there. And I think part of it is it wasn't just kind of like the bad white people and then the good white people. There
Mhm.
were also kind of what I would call the ineffectual white people, the ones who are like, oh dear, that's too bad. And then they just kind of like go on allowing, bad shit to happen.
Mhm.
And I thought that was just her sort of coming to terms with the fact that she's living in this world that she has to negotiate with sort of constantly on a daily basis, as one that is kind of hostile to her. I thought that was really well done and very tense.
I think her character work. The two things I really fixated on were that religious element, because duh, and B, the character work being that there's like, I read a lot of like grimdark fantasy where every character's gray, like none of them can be totally morally okay or morally bad. She did this really beautiful thing of there were objectively bad people, Haddock.
Mhm.
There were objectively good people, Gloria, Robert, and then the whole spectrum of characters in between were like Blue is good in a lot of ways, definitely looking for justice that he deserves.
Mhm.
Also, sometimes pretty damn terrifying and like intimidating
Yeah.
and
Blue
creepy.
scared the shit out of me, dude.
Yeah.
I would have been so scared to whenever Blue came around. I would have been like, "Oh, please get away from me!
Yeah.
Please go away."
And then you get like Miss, I forget the lady she works for. What's her name? Miss Annie.
Yeah, I think it's Miss Annie.
Miss
Yeah.
Annie, who's like oftentimes very passive and, like you say, just kind of like, oh, this stuff's happening, but then a few scenes like really defends Gloria and actually just. And I loved how she did that of like, here's the objective good, here's the objective bad, and then in between is where most people fall. I really enjoyed that.
And I think one of the things that made Blue terrifying was the fact that you think he's human at first.
Mhm.
But then there is that kind of like, oh fuck, recalculation, which is, I mean, that's always, it's something inherently scary about something that we think is one thing turning out to be another thing. Is I think the stuff that great horror is made of, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I
And
totally agree. It reminds me of, have y'all read Annihilation by Vandermeer?
I haven't read it. No.
So good.
No.
It's great. But the scene where or when she's like revealing that her husband came back and they like made love a few times, then she kind of realizes he's not really her husband. Like that whole idea of just like, can you imagine like, oh, I had sex with like a fungus zombie thing like 20 times, like, oh, and I thought it was my husband. It's just like it, but it's that same idea. Like, at first, Blue just seems like every other kid. He's got a lot going on, just like everybody there. He's hoping to get free. He's got his mission, but like, yeah, it pretty quickly turns to a much darker place when you realize what's really going on with him.
I think a layer that builds too is mistrust, and because Clay can tell you, I texted him about halfway through the book, and I was like, I don't trust this band director. I had no reason not to, but Tananarive had done so well at like establishing mistrust and who is good, who is bad. I don't know. That as soon as this band director showed up and was like, "Oh yeah, you can come play trumpet," I was like, "Something's up with you, lady. Like you're too nice. I don't like it." And I haven't finished the book, but you can spoil it for me. I'll still finish it. But is she nice? I don't know.
I don't believe, I'm not going to spoil it.
Yeah, nobody talented.
What?
Yeah,
Would you?
everybody's
there.
great, Travis.
I don't
Okay.
trust.
Everybody's
I don't trust.
gray.
I don't trust her. I'll tell you that right now. She's too kind.
That's fair, and that speaks to Tananarive's ability to make us distrust the system on every level. That even somebody who is also African American, who is clearly like volunteering to come in here and do like a good thing for these kids, we're still like, how close are you with Haddock though? Like, what are we doing here? You know, I do not trust anybody who would condone this organization on any level. And that's
as good as you are,
excellently
you're
done.
still participating in what's going on there just by showing up.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Also, small side note. You were yes, it is the Irish.
Oh,
Tree.
it is Iris's book. Yeah.
Iris book. Yeah.
What a strange small world it is.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, that's crazy. I never expected to. I mean, I've heard of this book for however long it's been out, but it's definitely one of those texts that they recommend you read. And I had no idea you went to grad school with her. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so let's see. I will bring up some talking points. So something I love about historical horror is utilizing the horror of real life, but also the speculative elements to process, digest, and explore it a little deeper through the beliefs represented in urban mythology and folklore. And I thought this story did an excellent job of showing all that. Like we get you were talking to it earlier, Kat, but the through line of Gloria was also one of my favorite parts of the novel, which surprised me because I'm a big fan like of the supernatural elements every time. I want to see the ghosts, I want to see the creatures. But Gloria's was by far to me the more terrifying story because it was that like ongoing feeling of just like you cannot even like get a modicum of a foothold right now with what you're trying to do, no matter how completely justified you are. Just completely justified, and it does not matter, and everybody's against you. And that feeling of, well, that's what depression feels like. And you know, like that was terrifying to me. It was this looming cloud over that part of the story that no matter how hard she tried, she just couldn't break through. And every time she sort of started to make progress, she put her foot in her mouth. And I just thought she had a great arc that way. But what do you guys think of that?
They keep gaslighting her too. You know, like, oh, this is normal, and she knows that it's not. But they're like, oh yeah, that's fine. You know, and it's like the cartoon of the dog sitting at the table where everything's on fire, and he's saying it's fine, right?
Fine.
And the other thing too that this book does so good at representing, like one of the best scenes is, you know, the family sort of trying to figure out how do they get rid of this sheriff and then this wannabe mayor who are approaching their door, because it's like in a way they can keep away the sort of white people who are they basically want to lynch them essentially. But then like it's this other guy who has more political importance that settles those people down, and then he can talk to them. But it's not like the tension doesn't go down, it goes up at that point. And when we talk like in high school, we talked about concentration camps in Germany and like why didn't they just rebel, and you know why didn't they do this or that. And I thought that this story does a really good job at showing like the way that Gloria, you know, she tries a bunch of different ways, talking to different people like politicians and lawyers and like other family, and they gaslight her, and they are like, well, you can try this, good luck, you know. So it's like she's trying all that stuff, and it's like there are all these dead ends which are like, yeah, we'll let the secretary know for you how to get an appointment with that person. And it's like it's, you know, it's she's trying everything, and then there are these like bureaucratic processes that are racist, you know. And it's like the bureaucracy isn't racist, but that's what it does, you know.
Yeah, I love that the why don't they just rebel mentality that I have heard that a lot as well, is like those people who say that, I'm like, you have not only have you never experienced something like that, which I haven't, but I don't even think you've experienced like the level of pain in just an athletic program. Like the amount of things you'll do to not be punished with pain are in like it is so hard to be a martyr. I don't think I couldn't be a martyr. I read the stories of the martyrs. I don't think I could do it. Like to resist the natural instinct to just stay alive and stay healthy is so impossible that when people do it, it's like I'm about to read this book called Ordinary Men, which is about the Nazi concentration police, and like it's journals of these like regular policemen in Germany who just start to slowly turn because like everything in their life starts to just turn towards this hatred toward the Jews. So they go from like your regular guy who's just patrolling the streets and trying to keep everything healthy and clean to, okay, I guess like this guy's a little more okay than this guy. Okay, well, I guess what makes him more okay is his religion, and it's like so incredibly crazy when people are martyrs. And I think this book points to that, especially with the kids in the prison of like, when you're getting whipped every time you do something even slightly wrong, you probably would start to obey the rules no matter what they were. Like,
I mean, rebelling at that point is like intentionally putting your hand on a red hot stove.
Yeah.
I mean, you can physically do that, but getting yourself to the mental point where you can just like is like insane.
Yeah.
And it takes more than just a handful of enthusiastic weirdos to overthrow the whole goddamn government.
It sure does.
I think that's to Kat's point of like why the Glorious story was so good is we see the struggles of a mind who is basically like making herself one of those. Like she's resisting that instinct of like, oh, if I just sit down, shut up, and let him serve his 6 months, everything will be fine. But there's a thing in her mind that we get to have this front row seat to that says, no, the 6 months will not be okay. Like something's going to go wrong. And
then someone might burn your house down. Yeah. And did you leave the stove on? Because I think you left the stove on.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is one more point. I know I'm talking a lot, but one more point of like,
you're talking a lot on a podcast. Oh my goodness!
On a podcast that I'm one of the hosts.
How dare you?
How dare I?
You bastard!
This is one thing I don't love about books as a medium, which I love books, as you can see. But this right here is about the point when she finds the lawyer. Yeah. And then I'm reading and I see this, and I'm like, this shit ain't gonna go right.
Yeah.
There's a whole 250 pages left of this book. This lawyer business ain't gonna work out.
It's so weird because like when you read a physical book, you've always got that going on. Whereas it's one of the reasons I kind of like reading on the Kindle because you don't have that, and you just like how much further, you can not see that and suddenly be like, oh fuck, the book is over, or it goes on another 300 pages. So, it's weird.
That's an interesting point. It's a built-in spoiler alert of sorts. And I like that conversation about why don't they just rebel, because that's so true. First of all, they did a lot of times.
Yep.
And secondly, like I like your point, Travis, and Jeremy, yours too, about the stovetop. But like, just be in a room with like 5 people who disagree on like a movie to watch, and watch yourself get sucked right into the majority, because people just hate to be discomforted.
Yeah.
They hate every variety of pain, and like social awkwardness is no exception. And this obviously goes much deeper, much further than that. It's lethal consequences, lethal stakes, but people can't even handle to disagree with their friends on like, hey, what'd you think of my new girlfriend?
Right.
She's cool.
Fine.
She's cool.
She's super cool.
Great.
I loved her.
Totally awesome.
Yeah, I hope
Hey,
you
I
guys
did-
get married.
I just proposed to her. Oh, great,
Oh,
Great.
dude.
Your
I
kids are
was
going
like,
to be cute.
When's that gonna happen?
Yeah.
So yeah, taking that to the level of like lethal consequences in
Yeah.
your life being on
Yeah.
the line is unimaginable, I would say, for the majority of people, at least in comfortable American society. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question for Kat.
Okay.
Yes. Thank God.
When it comes to horror, like I don't consider myself a horror writer, but then I'm writing a science fiction book and it's like, actually, there's kind of a lot of horror things in here. And I know with You Sexy Thing, like there's scary shit in that story that threw me for a loop. So, here Due is a horror writer, and she says that first about the Reformatory, which is interesting because it's so much historical fiction, and so much puts you in the world of like what it was like at that time. And so I was wondering about how you approach scary stuff in stories. Is it planned all the while? Do you have those ideas of like, oh, this would keep me up at night, or this will move people,
God,
this is
yeah.
a cliffhanger?
Well, no, I do think about that. I mean, and like, because I can remember going to see a movie that was just terrible, but then coming home and thinking about the one really scary scene and scaring myself so much I had to get up and write a story to kind of get it out. I know which scene you're talking about in You Sexy Thing, and it's actually kind of based on an old like House of Mystery comic book. And I wanted it's space opera, so really spectacular, weird death, right? And it is spectacular and weird. I didn't really think of it as horror. And I think of horror as a genre is one where you don't necessarily have a happy ending. In fact, a lot of the time in horror, you don't have a happy ending. You have just a sort of acceptance of one's fate, is perhaps the best you can do in some of them. Does that answer your question, Colin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And is that, I guess I was thinking, is that something that you're planning when you're writing the novel, or is it, can it be more specific to like what a character is going through?
It might be. I mean, because what I do when I'm drafting the book is I kind of think about the book, and I sort of roughly outline the first third, and then I write the first third, and then I outline the next third kind of based on what I've learned from writing the first third, and then kind of lather, rinse, repeat. But I do often think of scenes, because I'm like, oh, this one's going to be an interesting one to write, and like you're noodling around. Like I had this is kind of ridiculous. So last year I was feeding the squirrels in my backyard, and every time I went out I had like a pocket full of walnuts. I don't know whether this is Indiana squirrels versus anything else. This may have happened anywhere else. These squirrels got fucking ferocious. And I would go out there, and if I didn't have walnuts, they would start charging me. And and it's just, and it's not that a tiny creature charging at you is terrifying. I was worried that if one bit me, I would then have to capture it in order to avoid the rabies shot. This is part of being a writer, right? You kind of expect, And so I ended up kind of like doing a similar scene like that in Rumor Has It, where you have a kind of benign thing and then it just turns kind of weird and frightening. So yeah, you take moments from your own life, I think sometimes. I mean, not that I had anybody happen what happens in You Sexy Thing. I have not witnessed any deaths of that nature.
I think
it's national news right now that this lady nearby fed the raccoons for decades, and then 100 showed up in her backyard, and she had to call the police and ask for like
honestly,
a chopper out of there.
What's gonna happen?
I had
stuck in my house with 100 raccoons.
I had friends that were doing that when they lived up in the Chicago area, and they had literally dozens of raccoons showing up. And then when they moved, they actually paid somebody to come feed the raccoons and sort of wean them off food for like 6 months. But yeah, their neighbors must have just hated them. Just hated them.
I do.
Yeah.
I love that you implement those elements into your fiction too, because I think that's one beautiful thing about fiction is turning the regular like large and invoking feelings that regular things do, but you can do it in a larger. Like I think about, I've talked to death about this with Clay, but one of my favorite character like openers ever, again, is Stephen King, which this podcast is going to make me sound like I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I'm really not. I've read like 3 of his books, but in Cujo, he introduces one of his main characters by having him like walk out of his door, turn to his right, and he like narrates his inner thoughts as he pees on his like houseplant. And he's hoping that the houseplant dies because of the amount of alcohol in his urine. And I'm like, that is something that like fiction can do, that if I just saw this guy pee on his houseplant, I'd be like, that's disgusting. But hearing his inner monologue gives me that insight into like, oh, I know the type of person this guy is. Now. He's an alcoholic. He's kind of a jerk. He's vindictive towards nature. Like all of these layers are added that you can add, and you can take a simple story, like you said, Kat, of feeding the squirrels and then them becoming a menace, and add the layers of what are you thinking? What do you think the squirrels are thinking? How is that all coming together?
Play is, we've talked about this before about, horror enjoys playing with the reader, and Haddock is the villain and he is a point of view character.
Yeah.
And the first time you encounter it, you're like, oh, no, I feel wrong. This feels wrong.
Yeah.
But I feel like horror does that all the time.
It does. It's one of the genres, I think, where you get to see the monster perspective the most frequently, which is nice. And can be really interesting medium to tell the story for sure. I enjoyed Haddock's point of view. It wasn't comfortable. It was like claustrophobic and gross in there, but it was also like, it was cool to see the point of view and the way that she depicted that justification of this oppression and terrible treatment of people.
Yeah, he has a code. Like I just taught a lesson. I just taught a lesson in this of like Plato's Meno. Socrates talks about how virtue can't be just seeking good things, because everyone thinks they're seeking a good thing, right? Even if it's bad. So like Haddock has a code and he thinks he's doing the right thing. And I loved seeing that in his head. It reminded me very much, and this is the highest compliment I can pay to Tananarive, is of Cormac McCarthy of No Country for Old Men. Like Anton Chigurh has a code. He's a despicable, evil psychopath, but he has a code that he lives by that rules his life, and it directs everything, and he thinks it's the right way to live. And I think she did an excellent job with that.
And I think genre can do that too, right? Not just fiction. Fiction allows us, I think, to dive deeper into these things because we can manipulate it freely. So it's like the difference between painting a clay pot or analyzing a painting that's already on a clay pot and making the pot yourself and making whatever shape you want. And that's kind of cool. But I also think genre assists in that, because we were speaking to it earlier. I think it was Colin who brought up the literary aspects of this novel, and how literary fiction is just kind of like whatever you want it to be, and it's like, who fucking knows? I see that this is a New York Times bestseller. That gives me no information as to whether I will enjoy it. And I think genre, sorry, what was that, Jeremy?
I was gonna say 100%.
Yeah.
No idea what's gonna happen. Let's see.
Right. And sometimes it's awesome, and sometimes it's just straight up not. Like, even if the writing's great, it doesn't.
Purple
prose. Purple prose. It just might not be your cup of tea. And you have no way of knowing. And I think genre helps to put a few like barriers around that thing. You can kind of like, if you know what you like, and we all do know what we like on some level, like there's just something to it. I don't know what the things are for you guys, but like for me, if there's like wilderness horror, if there's forest horror, like there's something in the woods horror, I'm in it every time. It doesn't matter how bad it is or how stupid. I like, sign me up. I'm going in that forest. Like, just point the way, and
Well-
I'm in there.
Well, here's a question for you, Kat, because Clayton's pointed to something that did bother me about a book. So I worked at Barnes & Noble for about 3 months during the summer, and we had monthly picks.
It was such a big deal
It
for
was.
me for this season that you worked at Barnes and Noble.
And then
it's
I
like,
quit.
Also,
And
I'm
then I
quitting,
quit.
guys.
Anyway,
We're gonna start our season where I'm gonna quit. By the way,
we had monthly picks, and one of the monthly picks, I forget the name of the book because it was forgettable. But anyway, the thing that irritated me the most, and this is turning into a question, Kat, I swear. The thing that irritated me the most was characters spoke things that people do not say.
Oh, God.
Instead of keeping them as thoughts inside their head, which I think Tananarive does a really good
Yeah.
job at. But have you struggled as a writer? Is it a difficult task to figure out what is your character going to exposite and going to say, and what is your character simply going to think? Is that ever a hard line to balance? Because
Well-
one author did terrible at it.
See, I think most people have a pretty good consciousness of like what to say aloud versus, what's the joke? Like, oh, did I say that in my outside voice or that sort of thing? So I think it's one of the things that can make it really interesting with the characters to have them thinking one thing and saying another. I mean, that's always fascinating, or when somebody's saying to do one thing but acting in a different way. Does that kind of get at the question a little?
Yeah, and I think the purple prose turned me on to the question, because what happened was in this book that can't remember the name of, was everything was kind of spoken out loud. So you'd get characters who had these like deeply poetic thoughts, and they'd say them, and it'd be like this monologue about the nature of life and how death was an illusion. And I'm like, no one talks like that. No
Well,
one
you wouldn't
says
wanna
that out. Like,
Be around them, right? If
Exactly.
you talk like that
Certainly
all-
nobody talks
Oh,
like that
God.
without getting interrupted, and then
yeah,
and then everything just flies off the rails. I've been in conversations. I know what happens.
yeah, you're right though, Kat. Of like you and Jeremy, of you either get interrupted or it's stunted, I guess. But I don't know. I'm just curious from a writing perspective of if that's ever a hard thing of, okay, my character has this thought or has this idea. Are they going to speak it or are they going to think it?
I'm most of the time, I don't feel like I have trouble with that. I mean, it's one of the things that I like to, it's one of the reasons why I love omniscient point of view, because you can kind of dip into different thoughts and be like, oh, the ship's thinking this and the cook's thinking this and that sort of thing.
The question is,
think
did they
there's
read it
a-
out loud?
Yeah.
Did it get read out loud or not?
Good point. And that brings in another interesting question about genre. We're kind of getting towards the end of our chat here, Kat. So I'd like to shift over a little bit to you and your work specifically. And maybe we can just sort of segue with this question. Do you find the omniscient point of view to be a lot more, as somebody who's been a president of SFWA and everything like that, a lot more present in fantasy and sci-fi? I've been reading a lot of contemporary horror, and I don't see much omniscient in it. And I think it's because the more isolated the reader is, the more scary things are, the more is unknown. That's my personal theory on it. But what do you think about that? And why do you think the omniscient lends itself better to larger setting and sweeping things like fantasy and sci-fi?
I mean, I think I love omniscient because it is like the most powerful point of view you can work in. So the size of it is really useful. I think that omniscient point of view works really beautifully for humor. And I think that when you think of like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy,
Yeah.
or the Terry Pratchett is another good example of omniscient point of view. And it is so good for irony, and so good for kind of all those kind of like funny, snide little observations you can make. And so I see it a lot in more humorous science fiction writing. I don't see it so much in, I don't want to say serious, but kind of like maybe more dramatically oriented stuff. But on the other hand, I mean, because like there's different kinds of omniscient. Because like George R. Martin is kind of working in omniscient. It's just that like each chapter is a different character's point of view. It's just that he has 5,000 characters, right? So it feels like it's omniscient. So yeah, I think, but I think there is a perception of omniscient point of view as outdated and being kind of like that's what Jane Austen wrote in. So of course we can't, do that now. But Toni Morrison's Beloved is an omniscient point of view, if I'm remembering correctly. So yeah, it's still a very good, valid form to be working in.
Sure, and Mary Shelley wrote in first person,
Oh,
and
there
that
you
doesn't
go.
make anybody not want to read that. So,
What do you think of this just made me think of the unreliable narrator, because I recently have started Christopher Ruccio's sci-fi series.
Okay.
What is it called? I'm so bad with names. Empire of Silence.
I haven't read that yet,
yeah.
but I love unreliable narrators. I think they're very hard to pull off. One of my favorite horror stories of all time by Stephen Graham Jones has an unreliable narrator. It's called Father, Son, Holy Rabbit, and it is just killer story. Very
that's
unreliable.
so good and
So good.
Clay, if while you're editing this for audio, you can write down every book that we've mentioned in this episode so that I can add them to my list. Just
Right.
thanks for that.
Just a quick reading list. Do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think that
Well,
is
luckily, Father, Son, Holy Rabbit is just a short story. You can pick it up in like 4 different collections, including Best Horror of the Year.
Here comes another one. I think that is the best thing. I had a lot of problems with Patrick Rothfuss's Name of the Wind, but I think he kept me hooked because his unreliable narrator is very, very efficient.
Yeah.
Like, you have no idea if like old Kavoth is just completely full of shit. Like, because he could be.
Here's another thing Kavoth was good at.
Yeah, here's another thing. Like,
how about that?
Are you just
he's good at magic, he's good at singing, he's good at lovemaking.
It's also like
yeah.
Clayton and I grew up in a town, and I'm not trashing on Cup Bank. I love Cup Bank. I'm about to get married there. But we grew up in a town where there was a lot of hometown heroes at the bars that were like, I was the best quarterback of what. It's like, yeah, that guy exists.
Yeah.
But just like sings his praises at the bar.
He's there. He's there now.
But
he's there right now. Absolutely.
It is.
In that bar.
It is
Friday night. He is
8:29
there.
on a
Right, come on. You think
Friday.
he's not there? He's there at this moment, and he will never hear a word of this podcast. But
No, he
I
won't.
interrupted you, Kat.
I was just gonna say, I just wish Rothfuss would finish the series.
Yeah.
I reached the point where I don't think he's going to anymore because it's been so long.
Well, he could have finished the series, but he threw out his knee in high school, and he was never quite the same writer after that. You know what I mean? He used to be a writer like you, but then he took an arrow to the knee.
They took an arrow. I was just thinking, took an arrow to the knee.
Yeah.
Yes.
Writing mostly in the knees.
I was gonna go to college, but that hamstring just couldn't recover.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have wrestled after 8th grade, but boy.
I had someone, I was at a party, and they said to me, says, "Oh, you're a writer." And I said, He said, I would like to be a writer, but I feel I must conquer my inner demons first. And I thought he was joking around. And so I laughed. And then it turned out he wasn't joking around, and he was dead serious and very offended.
Yeah.
No,
Clayton has talked about that, and I would love to hear from someone with your amount of experience. I know we're coming to the end here, but I'm enjoying this conversation. Like, how hard is it being someone who's written as much and as long as you have, to constantly get that, like, oh yeah, I could do your job, even though it's like, no, you couldn't. Like, I have a unique perspective of having a brother who's a writer and then having ideas myself, but being like, no, I can't do this. How hard is it to hear people like that so often be like, I could do it.
I used to be married to a software developer, and we had a joke where periodically he would say something like, I have an idea for a story, and I would say, I have an idea for a mobile app. And that's because that's what people will do. They'll tell you like, oh, I've got this great idea and you can write it, and you're just like, no, the ideas keep me up at night. It's not like they're hard to find. But my favorite was, this was a dude at Microsoft, and he said, I have an idea for this novel about parasitic wasps. And I said, oh, well, maybe you could write the novel about parasitic wasps, because I'm not going to. He said, well, I'm going on a cruise next week to Alaska. Maybe I'll write it while I'm on the cruise. And I was just like, you do
the whole thing there. Wow.
You do that. You do that.
I mean, people don't realize like how much work goes into a book. It's not that you just kind of sit down and the words fall out and they're all in good order. You write that first draft, and then you've got this sort of shapeless, horrible, seething mass that you've got to make sense somehow.
Just this putrid, pussy pile of.
It's so
That's how I
terrible.
feel.
Yeah,
I just finished a new fantasy novel, and I sent it out to my beta readers, and I was like, yeah, you're gonna notice it starts out really well, but by the time you get to the ending, just be prepared everything to fall apart at that point. It's kind of rough in.
I hate to compare Stephanie Meyer to Martyrs, but that's where we're at.
boy.
But like, but like, I think it's the same thing of like, it's so incredibly difficult to be a martyr, but we all talk about it like, oh yeah, I would definitely resist if it came to that. I'm like, no, you probably statistically wouldn't. I think the same
Almost
thing
certainly
of like,
not.
yeah, I think the same thing of like writing of like, oh yeah, I could write a book. It's like, you're not that Stephanie Meyer. That is a really weird thing that happened statistically. Like, this takes a lot of work. I've seen my brother struggle through it. I've watched interviews of the process, and like, it's a job.
It is.
Every once in a while someone catches fire like she did. Her book's not great. I will stand by that. But like, it caught fire.
It did.
But it's the same thing of like, statistically, that's not going to happen. Like, I feel like there has to be a open eyes going into it. Am I wrong on that? Or
no, I mean, and I tell my students, don't be going into writing because you think you're going to make a lot of money off it. If you're going to do that, there are several professions that are much more guaranteed to get you money. And honestly, I think people are going to be better off here in America if they get a job with healthcare rather than, and work on their writing in their free time. I mean, I don't want to sound discouraging, but this is not a country that treats its creatives very well. And it's a hard way to make a living.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely true. It is possible. And I think that isn't taught enough too. I will say that. I think they don't teach us that in school.
No.
Because you're right, Kat. Like, it is an uphill battle all the way through. There's nothing easy about it. You will work 3 times harder for 1/3 the pay until you don't, if you're lucky. But like, I mean, look at you, for example. I mean, you've published in all the pro mags. You've published everywhere it matters in your genre. You have, man. You have. I'm not blowing smoke up your ass or anything. That's just a fact. Like, in any other profession, like, you'd be rolling in it, just from your amount of success you've had. But yeah, and you've written 6 novels, dude. Like, that is a huge accomplishment. But like, and then there's Stephanie Meyer, and I'm not hating on her. I I'm happy for her. I think it's awesome what she accomplished, and that's a lightning strike thing, though.
Yeah.
And there are way more authors like you, like Shiv Ramdas, like so many awesome authors out there who do not get the recognition they deserve, who have accomplished a lot. And who are known in their industry and, only to a limited degree outside of that. I mean, you certainly have a great following. You have all your students and you have plenty of readers. So I'm not downplaying that. I hope you know that.
Well,
It's just, people know George R.R. Martin. And there's just only a few authors that get that international recognition on a level where they become a millionaire. It's just not a thing.
Absolutely. And I'm not, that's not my kind of goal, right?
Right.
Sooner or later, and I do a lot of teaching, and I do a lot of freelancing, and I do a certain amount of editing. But if I had my druthers, I would be writing rather than anything else. But like I was talking to my financial advisor, and he was like, when are you going to retire? And I was like, no. And and so, I mean, I'm very lucky. I'm in a profession where I'm doing what I want to do. And I think that's worth a great deal.
I think, well, I've said one more question like twice now, I think. But anyway, you keep bringing up great questions, Kat. I'm a teacher.
She does that. She does it all the time.
Yeah.
It's just
Cheers to
infuriating.
you.
I'm a teacher. Clayton's a writer. The blend of those two things is what you do. Is there, I'm sure the answer is yes, but I would love to hear from your perspective again. In teaching, I have found you have to like run a mile on a crumb. Like I have to be able to to take that one student who gets the thing I'm trying to get and use that for the rest of the month, if not the rest of the year, is like the positive, because that's not going to come a lot. Is that similar in writing where you have to like take your small little victories and stretch them to really provide you that boost?
No, you do have to kind of like, I have an email folder that's just like every once in a while I get a nice piece of mail. And so that's kind of my rainy day folder where if I'm feeling depressed, I can go look through a folder of people saying nice things. No, you absolutely have to do that. And you have to prepare for rejections. That's just, I still get rejections, and we have my Discord channel, my server with my little writing community. I love to see, we have a channel where we just post rejections, and I love to see them in there because I know that means people are sending stories out. And they're, you cannot publish stuff if you don't send stuff out. What is the dog's name, Travis?
Agnes.
She's a lovely girl.
You
She's also a psychopath.
You featured your cat.
Sure.
Well, I had to feature my dog. She was sniffing. She is a psychopath.
Naturally, yeah.
I've been trying to feature my cat too, but she refuses to jump up. She just wants to sit below me and scream at me, which is why I've been periodically muting my microphone. And why, when you hear the podcast version of this episode, listeners, you will hear a screaming cat here and there. It's just part of the game. And it'll probably jump to my face, even though I'm not the speaker, because that's how it does it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
But,
saddle up for that.
Kat, I love that you mentioned that Discord with the rejection things, because I think again, to relate it to different careers and stuff, like I don't know, it's good to evaluate those times when I've failed as a I really botched that lesson, so let's
don't hear
let's
about the
not
amazing
do that
writers
again.
that have gotten all the rejections they've gotten.
Oh God, no, but they have. Like there used to be a writing group in Portland called Wordos. And one of the things that they did when they met up in person was if you had a rejection, they would give you a piece of candy. And so on our rejection channel, that's all the reactions that we put on people's stuff is you get pieces of candy or ice cream sundaes or whatever. So, yeah.
I mean, if you hear back, that's pretty good.
Oh God, yeah.
True. A personalized rejection is its own little victory. And
if
that doesn't speak to what Travis was talking about with the crumbs, then I don't know what it is.
But it is, because it's a ladder where you're getting the form rejections at first, and then you start getting slightly encouraging notes, and then you start getting slightly more, and then maybe a, hey, not this time, but would you send something else?
Yeah, if
Mhm.
they apologize, it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think
If they're
Anybody-
sorry, there's a chance.
that's it. Anybody that's listening, that's sending stuff out, anytime an editor says, send me something else, they mean it. They're not
Mhm.
blowing smoke, because they're getting hundreds and hundreds of stories. And so they're not being nice. They do want to see something else.
Yeah,
makes
and
sense.
they got
Ah.
time to be nice. That's for
That-
sure.
Mhm.
that's why I thought of this question of like, I can't believe I haven't told this story before on air, but I'm gonna share it because I love it so much. The high I've ridden for teaching for almost 3 years now, because I just always go back to it, is I was in Philadelphia. I was teaching a catechesis class for children being joining the Catholic Church, and my whole thing was like, don't just join because your grandma said you should. Like, you should know what all this means. And I taught about like grace and how I had been talking to Clay for a while, so I was like, oh, rock climbing is a great metaphor, because like, okay, you have your point where you're tethered, you're climbing up to that, and if you fall down, like, God's grace is going to stop you from falling all the way back down to the bottom, but you still have to climb back up to your point. And I had this one boy who had not uttered a single word in the whole like 7 weeks we'd done it, and he'd always like slouched in his chair, and he raised his hand and he was like, so Mr. Vermolum, you're saying like, if I mess up, God and me still cool? I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. He's like, dope. Sat back down. And like,
Hell yeah.
3 years, every time I'm like, I'm not a good teacher, I just think of like, dope.
Yeah.
You know what? I can do
Absolutely.
this. I can do this. And I think
That's awesome.
what you're speaking to is a lot of that writing of,
Yeah.
It's the same thing of like, just take that little victory, take that crumb, and keep persevering.
Absolutely.
I think we can all agree that God or the Great Spirit or whatever you believe in's grace is certainly dope. And something
Really
else that is
dope,
dope
yes.
is Cat Rambo and her work. Before we sign off today, Cat, can you just give us a little rundown of your series, which stems from the first book, You Sexy Thing, and works up to your most recent book? Tell us a little bit about what it's about, why people should go read it, why they should get all the way to that third book and enjoy
All right.
the adventure.
Well, the series starts with a crew of retired mercenaries that have set up a restaurant aboard a space station, doing wonderfully. In fact, a critic is about to arrive and possibly give them a coveted nickel and star,
Nice.
nickel and orb. And then a mysterious package arrives, things start exploding, and they're forced to steal an intelligent ship that doesn't think it wants to be stolen. And that is the title character. You Sexy Thing is the name of the ship that they steal. They
Nice.
run into enemies, and the adventure continues in the next 2 books with basically space pirates and lots of space food. So in the most recent one, they have reached a planetoid Coralland, which has some of the most fabulous gardens in the known universe, and they are going to find ingredients there, the like of which they have never seen before.
Awesome. So a nice mix of culinary and space opera. That sounds awesome. It sounds like this had a profound impact on you as well, because I saw in your bio that you've co-authored a cookbook.
Oh,
Like a
that was a
sci-fi
long
cookbook?
time ago. So the cookbook was for it was the SFWA 50th anniversary, and somehow I don't know that it was my idea, but somehow I got to be the person to implement it. Fran Wild and I put together the SFWA 50th anniversary cookbook, which had 118 contributors of different recipes, and I'm never going to edit a cookbook ever again because there's such a pain in the butt. But it was it has the only recipe that William S. Gibson knows, which he told me he stole from Neil Stevenson.
That's good.
It has my recipe for Welsh rarebit. It has how to do a pig roast. If you're wondering, somebody wrote up how to do a pig roast. There's a lot of, the only recipe in it I would not stand by is there is a gluten-free cornbread dressing that Jerry Pornell contributed, which I gotta say I do not think is a good stuffing recipe, and I would avoid that one. Everything else is fine.
All right.
Okay.
There you go.
Well, awesome. And what else do you have happening right now, Kat? I know you've got your Wayward Academy for
I-
writers. Tell us a little about that. And I know you've got a writing retreat.
So I've been running this writing school online for about over a decade now. And last year we had our first live event, which was in an 13th century castle in Spain, which was amazing.
Cool.
This year we're doing it in New Mexico at a place called the Painted Pony. It's a big yoga resort / ranch. And it's kind of cool because it's also a dark sky preserve, if you know what that is. It's so you can see the stars really wonderfully there. And then next year, we're hoping to do it in Barbados. So I'm super stoked about that. The plan is to do it like 1 year in the US, then 1 year out. Yeah, the Academy, when the pandemic hit, the Academy really kind of saved me. And I was running daily co-working sessions for people and just connected a lot with people via Zoom calls. And that maintained what amount of sanity I still have. Yes.
It's good to have a community in a time like that. That's for sure. And
it really was.
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm glad you had that, Kat, and I'm glad the world has you. You have contributed a lot to the sci-fi and fantasy and literary genres in general. So thank you for that. Thank you for contributing to education, making people better writers. And thank you so much for coming on Fermented Fiction. It was a blast to host you.
This is a great time.
Heck yeah.
Delightful.
And to everybody out there listening, go check out the Reformatory. It is awesome. It is brutal and devastating and sad and terrifying, but it's also got a lot of hope in it. It has a lot of glorious revelations about how the human spirit can overcome any obstacle. And I really do highly recommend it. Its accolades are well deserved. There's not a wasted word in the whole novel, and there's not an unearned moment of tension. So I highly recommend giving it a read. Give Cat Rambo stuff a read. And we hope we see you on another episode of Fermented Fiction. What, Travis?
I know we're at our edge, but we got to do the rating. That's part of the show.
Duh.
Yeah, you done been caught.
We got to rate the Reformatory on the scale that is so chaotic. So our scale here on the show, before we sign off, we're all going to rate this book is how many drinks would you have to consume to enjoy it at its fullest? So we're going to start. Kat, we'll give you time to think.
Okay.
Let's start with Jeremy.
And we could give Kat an example, perhaps.
Yeah. Jeremy, give Kat an example.
Oh, this is going to be exemplary, all right. So what we need to do is a strategy, right? We need to start off because I feel like I certainly agree. The most unsettling and whatever parts of this book are, earlier on when it's just people being horrible, but like in a real way. So I need to drink enough to be like brave about to fight. So we need some beers. The cheaper the better to start off with. And then once you get the ghosts in there, it's like, ghosts, what a relief. Then you can sit back and enjoy with, I don't know, a nice cocktail for every 2 hours of the audiobook you've got left. So all told, I'd say anywhere between 15 and 20 drinks for this book.
15 and 20, Dane. Okay, Colin, what are you thinking?
He'd been drunk on cheap corn liquor when he lit that match, no doubt about it.
Yeah, you'll want some of that.
So you'll want some cheap corn liquor whenever you read a Haddock chapter.
Yeah.
Otherwise, a few beers. So I'm going to say, 5 drinks.
I think I'm gonna skip over Clay and come back to you, Clay, because I just have to agree with that. I think like I'm drinking every haddock scene. I'm having either like good strong sip of whiskey, because I'm just like, ooh, this man is so evil, and I need something to get through that. In a good way. It's such a good book. But yeah, I think every haddock monologue or every like whipping scene, I need something strong to like. So I'm gonna say that's probably gonna amount to what, 8-ish shots of whiskey. Yeah, throughout the whole book. So I mean, it's spaced out.
It's a very long book, so yeah, you're not getting plastered
it's
with
spaced
that.
out, but yeah, 8 to 10 shots of good whiskey. Clay, what's your rating?
I think that's a pretty solid rating. I like the beer and the shot combo for my Southern Gothic sort of historical horror here. And I am taking the shots on the haddock chapters for sure.
You'll want that.
I feel like I'm probably sipping, and then when I get to some of these moments of Gloria's world crashing down or haddock chapters, that's maybe when I get out the whiskey and I pour myself a little shot. But yeah, I would say over the course of reading, so like however many sessions it takes you to read a book of this magnitude, for me it was probably like 10 good reading sessions. I'm doing the beer and the shot combo, one each, and I'm just saving the shot for when I need it, because there's going to be some time I need it in all 10 of those sessions.
Yeah, you got to be prepared for that.
Indeed.
All right, last but not least, our guest, Cat Rambo.
All right. So for me, it's going to be glasses of wine, probably like a Pinot Grigio or something like that.
Delightful.
And I like the 8 to 10 figure because I think that's like how many glasses of wine over the course of a book it might work. But then I was thinking that when I finished it, I would finish it with a drink that I always associate with the South, because that's where I had it first, which is a Slow Gin Fizz. There's something about that I think would be a nice capper for the end of the book. So 8 to 10 wines and then a Slow Gin Fizz.
Nice.
The end
What
of the book
is a Slow
definitely
Gin Fizz?
draws in all these story threads. So you got to have a celebratory drink at the end, the last couple chapters.
The gin fizz has egg white in it that's beaten up. Gin and I don't know what else. There's usually sugar around the rim, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm always pro sugar.
Oh, yes.
Right on.
I'm always pro gin, so there you go.
All right, here we go. Because we're going to get hate mail if we don't go over it. 2 ounces of gin, an ounce of lemon juice, freshly squeezed, 3/4 of an ounce simple syrup, and egg white club soda to top, about 1 ounce.
You go. There you
Okay.
Finish
It
your
sounds
reading.
delicious. I want one right now.
Finish your
Gin
reading of
Fizz.
the Reformatory with that exact drink.
There you go.
There you go. Thank you, Cat Rambo.
There you go.
Thanks,
This is
Cat, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. My goodness.
Thank you, everybody else, for being here. Thank you, listeners, for being here. And we will see you next week with another great debate and discussion of our next topic, which I will announce on social media. You can follow us here. Please like, subscribe, and do all the wonderful things on our YouTube channel. You can find me at all channels, Instagram, Facebook, and everything as Clay Vermeulen Fiction. Cat, where can people find you?
I am at Cat Rambo, all one word, on Twitter, and I just about everything. I've managed to secure my name. So
Right on. And yeah, I mean, Travis and Jeremy don't do a lot of social media, and Colin has challenged you to find his handles on your own. So good luck with that.
Good luck.
Thank you all for being here. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
Laters.
awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Cat.